Good afternoon. I hope you're all rehydrated or recaffeinated after a long day, so settle in. My name is Emma Brandy, and I am honored to be presenting the Session 5's incredible speakers. I spoke with each one of them before today and asked them the same 4 questions. What was your first canoe trip memory? What inspires you about canoe tripping? What career passion are you following now? And what brings you to present at the Symposium? The following are our next speaker, Dave Brown's responses to my questions. Dave came across Sigurd Olsen after his first year of college, and because of Sigurd's writing, Dave convinced his family to drive up to Quetico area of northern Minnesota. They paddled there for a week together, and he has been hooked ever since. Dave feels that canoe tripping is a nice convergence of his interests, paddling, camping, and fishing. He loves that it simplifies life and the static goes away. His concerns become focused. Dave is currently living in Craftsbury Common, a small town in Vermont, where he has his own woodworking shop. Previous to this, Dave was a teacher at a small college where he taught outdoor education. Now he combines his love for the outdoors with his successful woodworking business. Dave has spent much of his time on the water and has also documented these trips through slide photography. As the digital age has progressed, Dave realized that most of his slides would probably end up in the landfill. Because of this, he was inspired to create and publish a book with his collection of canoe trip photographs. He is here today to talk about this process, and he hopes to inspire others to create their own books. So, without further ado, please welcome Dave Brown.
Thank you. To be here, and it's wonderful to feel part of this community of paddlers. I titled my presentation Book Building for Paddlers, but I was reminded last night that we could have just as easily called this Book Building for snowshoers or skiers or dog sledders or hikers or bicyclers. So it'll you can choose your appropriate mode of transportation for this. One of the many pleasures associated with whatever kind of travel we do is sharing them with friends long after the trip is concluded. The purpose of my talk is to nudge some of you to consider and walk you through the process of assembling your own books to share the stories and images from your experiences on the water. Just out of curiosity, could I get a show of hands to see how many people have already put together a book of your own, self-publishing? So not very many. I hope a lot more of you will think about it at the end of my talk. My northern paddling began in the early 1970s. An interest in photography meant that a camera and a plentiful supply of slide film were always part of my gear. I've been fortunate to be able to devote a fair portion of most summers since then to exploring northern waters. As the decades passed, my collection of slides, maps, and journals grew to the current point at which these trip artifacts occupy roughly 12 feet of shelf space in our home. Opportunities to give slideshows are infrequent, and I realize that the final resting place for my slides may very well be in the bottom of a landfill. So, inspired by several friends, including Alex Gusev and Chris Rush, who had published or put together their canoeing books, I decided to venture into the world of print-on-demand self-publishing. An online search revealed a number of different companies. I decided to work with a company called Blurb and have had nothing but good results with them so far. Before embarking on the larger project that I had in mind, I decided to assemble a quick and dirty book, sort of a souped-up photo album, to get a feel for the process and to see what the finished product looked like. After downloading the free software, I imported digital photos. I made the switch from slide film to digital film, or digital cameras, in 2009, from a 2012 canoe trip in Northern Ontario, and fairly quickly assembled an album of photographs. For this book, I used templates that were provided with the software, and I experimented with various borders on the photos and different background colors. The organization for this book was relatively straightforward since it featured only one trip. You'd obviously start at the beginning and go to the end. I included only one page of text and no captions. Keeping things simple, one could put together a book like this fairly easily in a weekend. Encouraged by the results, which were, the book ended up being about 32 pages in softcover, cost $24, hardcover around $30. I had 3 copies printed for trip members and then dove into the bigger project ahead. For my next book, I plan to feature my favorite photos from more than 4 decades of northern canoe travel. The first task was to wade through roughly 15,000 slides and narrow them down. After selecting 600 or so, I spent 3 days at the home of a friend who had a high-quality scanner. Lacking a comparable friend with a scanner, 35mm slides can be scanned commercially. I went online and looked, and there are places that'll do it for 39 cents a slide. And a lot of public libraries have scanners that one could use to scan slides of your own. The digital images then went into a program called Lightroom for storage and photo editing. I learned fairly quickly that even the best of my slide images could be improved with judicious cropping and color adjustment. I spent a lot of time initially wrestling with how to organize this book and what I wanted it to look like. The canoeing and photography books in my library furnished many examples of layout and design, and the tens of thousands of owner-built books easily previewed on the Blurb bookstore help one realize what you like and what you dislike. I was interested in seeing what was published in terms of Labrador, so in the bookstore search I typed in Labrador and was quite amazed to discover that hundreds of people had published books on Labrador. It didn't take me very long to realize that about 98% of these books were about Labrador retrievers. I eventually settled on an approach to organizing my book. Because of limited space on the screen of my laptop computer, about the size of an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, I made draft quality thumbnails, black and white prints of each of the photos that I was considering using. Our dining table then provided plenty of room, and I could play around with layout options by taping photos onto sheets of scrap paper to represent each 2-page spread. So this is the starting point for your book. One begins by downloading the free bookmaking software. There are 3 versions available, ranging from simpler to more complex. And I should mention that I'm somewhat of a technophobe. I still haven't advanced to the point where I have a cordless drill, and I certainly haven't advanced to a cordless telephone yet. So my computer skills are modest at best. Blurb has an abundance of very helpful instructional text and videos on all aspects of bookmaking, and a very helpful customer support department. So after deciding which format you're interested in using, and that's basically the size, they have 7 by 7, 8 by 10, or 11 by 13, you import the photos, the digital photos that you want to use, and you can either do that all at once or you can import them in chunks. Then you begin page by page, spread by spread. Generally, you'll think about putting your book together as a spread. The 2 facing pages will function as a unit. And you proceed to build your book, page by page and spread by spread. Any given page can be text, it can be photographs, it can be any combination you want to make it. It can be both. Large volumes of text can be imported from elsewhere. Smaller quantities of text, such as captions, can simply be typed in place. The minimum book length is 20 pages, and more can be added as you desire. For this book, I ended up making a number of sort of custom templates because I had to mix a bunch of different photos. I have horizontals and verticals, and I didn't really find exactly what I wanted to use, so it's fairly easy to make a custom template. You draw an image box on the blank piece of paper or on the box, and you can duplicate that to make them exactly the same size, and then it's easy to align them in whatever fashion you want, and then you can save that format to use subsequently in your book. Once you've selected the template for a given page, you go back to the library of photos that you've imported, and you just simply click and drag the photo into the image box, and it's there. Once it's in the box, you can do all kinds of things to it. You can flip it, you can crop it, many different things you can do with it. So eventually, you start to fill up all the pages, and this is what your book starts to look like. I came to appreciate very quickly all the decisions that must be made relative to book design and layout, with different fonts, borders, background colors, sizes, but I found the process to be very enjoyable and satisfying. When you're finally happy with the layout of your book, you upload it to Blurb, wherever they are. An online, it disappears over the phone lines. An online preview of your book will now be available. You can look at it actually as Blurb has it, and if it all still looks good, at this point you'll choose one of 3 different cover options. It can be soft cover, hard cover with a dust cover, or hard cover, what's called image wrap. And then you have 5 different choices of paper in terms of the finish of the paper and the weight of the paper. And then you make that decision, and then you're ready to order a copy. I'd strongly suggest that you think about ordering 1 copy initially as sort of a proof, because things look different in the book than they do on the computer screen. So you order your copy, and in roughly 2 weeks, your printed book, appears in your mailbox or post office. This edition will provide the opportunity for you to finally really carefully scrutinize and correct everything from spelling, grammar, pagination, centering, photo resolution, color adjustment, and so on before you order your 50,000 copies. It's a good idea to recruit several friends as proofreaders and have them go through it carefully and make suggestions and so on. But I'll warn you that don't be surprised if you get conflicting advice from people. A lot of times some people really like this cover photograph, and other people said, oh, it's terrible, you've got to change it. So the bottom line is it's your book, so you do with it as you like. So at this point, you have the option of making your book available to preview and for sale by invitation only to friends or to the entire world through the Blurb bookstore and or Amazon. You can also make your book available as an ebook. I don't know why anybody would want to do that, but your paddling companions will cherish the book that you make for them, but for most of us it's probably a prudent idea to keep our day jobs and not rely on book sales for buying groceries. Making money with book sales was never one of my objectives. From my standpoint, the only drawback of digital self-publishing is the relatively high cost per book. My 11 by 13 book cost a little over $100. If you order quantities, you get some slight discounts. If you get up to 750 or more, offset printing becomes available, and the cost can come down significantly. The other thing to keep in mind is that Blurb very regularly offers sales on either buying books through their bookstore or ordering books of your own from anywhere from 15% to 35%. So if you're patient, wait for one of those 35% sales and then order copies for your friends or family or gifts or whatever you're doing. So for the remainder of the time, I'm basically going to share some of the segments of the book with you and show you sort of how I put together. It'd be nice if we could all sit down together on a sofa and look at the book, but that's not going to work so well. So, since I was including photos from so many different years and so many different trips, I chose to organize the book on the basis of themes or aspects of canoe tripping. I began with an overview of the landscapes in which the travel takes place, then the various components of canoe travel: flatwater, whitewater, wading and lining, portaging, then in-camp scenes, people scenes, and finishing up with fish and wildlife. I'd call myself a lot of things before I call myself a writer, so I kept the text to a minimum. I finally settled on a layout that began each section with text on the left page with a full bleed photo on the right. The subsequent photos in each section were included more or less chronologically. I wanted to include some maps early in the book to give viewers an idea of where the photos were taken. And in general, I think any book about a trip would almost require having a map in there of some sort. So we've only used a float plane to start or finish a trip a handful of occasions, but this photo taken while flying in to Cabot Lake on the headwaters of the George River in northern Quebec provides a wonderful sense of the overall landscape. The photo on the left is from a trip down the rivers that parallel the Quebec North Shore and Labrador Railroad, the Nipissau River. The right is simply an unnamed lake in northern Quebec. And as many of you certainly realize, a lot of the best photos are taken during fairly brief times where you have really special light. So it pays to pay attention to the light and keep your cameras handy for those brief occasions. Putting together the book involved thousands of decisions and compromises. Of the 600 slides I scanned, I included a bit over 200. Ideally, each photo would have its own full page, but such a book would quickly balloon to gargantuan proportions, so limited space must be shared. We tried to schedule a generous amount of time for our trips to allow for off-river hikes after the day's travel or on layover days. The photo on the left is the Nastapoca River in northwestern Quebec. The one on the right is a river called the Clark River, which flows into Menehek Lake in Labrador. If your book includes text, it's important to give some thought to your intended audience. My book was not intended for a general audience, so I didn't really make an attempt to, for instance, explain what is meant by a tump line or a wanigan or a setting. And it's definitely worthwhile experimenting with different fonts, because the font you choose has a huge impact on what your book looks like and what it feels like. The sunrise shot was on the Winisk River. Again, I woke up and realized that there was a spectacular sunset in the making, so my friend Dave was still asleep, so I quickly rousted him out of his sleeping bag and had him go out and paddle around in the river for me for a quick photo shoot. The photos in the book reflect sort of the evolution in the kinds of canoes that we've used over the years, starting with aluminum and then a variety of wood canvas canoes for many years, and then a switch to ABS, and then, alas, in our later years, a switch to Kevlar. I wrestled with what information to include in captions in terms of who was in the photo, the date it was taken, the location, and so on. I'm not sure there's a dead right and dead wrong way to do it, but it's a good idea to be somewhat consistent and decide how you're doing it. Another decision for this book was to keep the design basically fairly simple. I didn't use any background colors, I didn't use any borders, and that kept sort of a clean, simple look, which is what I was looking for. Good whitewater shots are extremely challenging, especially with a manual focus lens. which I was using up until about 2010. So of the hundreds and hundreds of whitewater shots I've taken, I think I have about a handful that I'm happy with. The photo on the left is the headwaters of the Clearwater River in Labrador. And again, the red canoes really sort of spice up what's otherwise a fairly drab landscape. So there's something to be said for having brightly colored canoes. They make your photographs a lot more snappy. This is wading up an unnamed brook in the Symmetry area of central Quebec. And I'm definitely partial to wood canvas canoes, definitely for photography, for paddling. You can't beat them. The only problem is when you have to carry them. I prefer photographing generally early and late in the day. Anytime you get fog or overcast, generally makes for better photographs than bright sunny conditions, which are my least favorite. Our travel up the Palmer River through the Torngat Mountains in Labrador provided some of the most spectacular landscapes we've encountered. Many think I'm crazy, but I actually enjoy portaging, and I missed it on some of the trips we've done that involve primarily coastal travel. This is a photo portaging into the headwaters of the Nastapoca River in Labrador. It's helpful to have cooperative companions willing to pose while heavily loaded in a blizzard of black flies. The photo, well, actually all these photos are portaging out of Richmond Gulf, up the Wheatwater River, headed for Clearwater Lake. This one is the canyon of the Kogalik River, which flows out to the coast of Labrador. This is my brother. I dragged him along on one trip. Sadly, he didn't really take to canoeing, so his first canoe trip was also his last. But the red shirt really spices up this picture, and if you imagine a khaki shirt on him there, it would be much less interesting. It's great to include, I like seeing photographs that depict all the activities that take place in camp, whether it's cooking or cutting firewood or setting up a tent or setting up a tarp or whatever. And here Dick Irwin is just taking out a couple loaves of freshly baked bread. The rainbow picture was taken after an intense storm on Seal Lake in northern Quebec. And this is, both of these are on the Nastapoca River. This is Alexandra cooking breakfast just at the lip of the falls, the upper falls and the final gorge. And then a full moon setting over our final camp at the mouth of the Nastapoca River. I've always enjoyed working at getting portraits of my companions. This is on the Missinaibi River, one of my earliest trips. I'll read just one short quote from my book, and I wrote that one might argue that the choice of colleagues is the most important decision of the trip. Incompatible companions will make the best of trips miserable, while a terrible trip in other respects with fine companions can still be fun. There's an alarming increase in the frequency of gray hair and gray beards in the photo in this book. I don't know why that works. I've loved to fish as long as I can remember, and that's one of the primary reasons that I enjoy traveling up north. Early reviewers of my book felt I included too many fishing photos. While I disagreed, I grudgingly removed 6 pages worth. I also paid attention to symmetry in laying out the photos in terms of which way the fish are going or which way the canoes are going. And it's easy to flop photos. The computer will do that pretty easily. So if you want to have the upper row fish all point to the right, you can do that, and the lower ones all point to the left. It's easy to do. Fish always provide a welcome addition to many of our meals. Encounters with a variety of wildlife have greatly enriched our trips. The first time we encountered any significant numbers of caribou was on the Swampy Bay River, and we woke up one morning with caribou just streaming out of the woods, and for the next 3 weeks would see hundreds, if not thousands, of caribou a day. And literally at some points we're in rapids having to dodge caribou as we paddle down the rapids. And one morning I needed to evict this fellow who'd spent the night in my boot. And when I was all done with the book, I had a whole bunch of group photos for which I'd found no home. I had an empty last page, and so I decided to put together sort of a mosaic of some of the group photos over the years to use that last page. And then I had an empty last page, so I said, well, I'll use up some of my close-up photos here and make sort of a mosaic of that. So I hope I've given a few of you the courage to tackle a book of your own. I'll look forward to seeing some of your books online and in person in the years to come. Thank you very much.